Hey, how's everybody doing today?
Not that great, Mr. Goblin.
Yeah, not so good.
Nah, nah, nah.
Oh, for real? What's wrong, you guys?
Clarence is tired.
Well, why are you so tired?
Watching you work. Go, go, go. You're exhausting.
Oh, yeah, I guess I have been burning the candle at both ends, huh? I'm sorry. I didn't mean for the stress to rub off on you guys. I know I got a couple irons in the fire, but I'm staying on top of it as best I can.
Just a couple irons, huh? Tell him what's really going on.
Well, okay. I'm sculpting and painting my toys like always.
And what else?
Well, the Wonder Goblin Show, of course, takes a good bit of work to produce.
Yeah, there's more. Keep it coming.
It's true. I run a toy paint company, Vinyl Wonder, and that does take up a good chunk of time. And I do have a few conventions and a couple solo shows coming up that I have to prepare some work for.
And come on, out with it now.
Okay, I guess the secret's out. I'm building my own vinyl toy factory.
Finally, he admits it. Woohoo!
Yay, good for you. All right.
Yes, it's very exciting, but it's also been a lot of work, and there's a lot more work to go. And it's just me and my dad building it from the ground up. So, yeah, Clarence is right. I really should press pause on something.
What's it gonna be?
I can tell you already know the answer, and that's why you guys are sad. This season of the Wonder Goblin Show must come to an end.
Yes, it does make Clarence very sad.
I am always sad, so it makes no difference to me.
Thanks, Wonderbot. And thank you, Clarence, for pushing me to talk about it. It's time for me to buckle down and focus so I can get this magical factory up and running. But before I do, I'm going to leave y'all with something special. In the last episode, we made some prototype molds out of silicone. And now I'm going to show you how to use those molds for their intended purpose, to pour a sofubi wax prototype that is factory ready. So let's get to it, shall we? All right, the first thing we want to do with this mold is to secure it with some rubber bands. And these rubber bands are actually made of silicone, which are way more resilient than regular old rubber bands. Highly recommend. And if you haven't already watched the last episode where I show you how to make one of these molds, check it out. The title of the video is Vinyl Wind-Up Toys Silicone Molds. And I'm just checking the part line here. We want to keep things as seamless as possible. Okay, time to preheat the molds. You might remember this warming station from a couple videos back. Great for warming and assembling toys, but also good at preheating molds. Why preheat silicone molds? Well, if you pour hot wax into a cold mold, you're going to get chill lines, and we don't want that. So, warm it up. You're going to need a wax melter, a thick paper cup, a mixing stick, meat thermometer, gram scale, and your various waxes. Now, this wax recipe I'm using is my personal recipe. I call it Wonder Wax, and if you've been following me on Patreon, you already know the recipe. So, we're not going to go over all that again. Another reason I don't want to give you a specific recipe is because every sofubi factory has their own way of doing things, and some are very particular about the types of wax they accept. So double check with the factory that you use first and ask them what's acceptable. If they have a recipe they prefer you to use, just use that. If you're doing this yourself like me and making your own copper molds, then do some tests with different recipes and figure out what works best for you. Play around with paraffin. Try adding a little microcrystalline. You might want a little carnauba in it. You might not. Part of the fun of this whole thing is figuring out your own way. I can't hold your hand and walk you through the entire process because I'm still figuring it out myself. I've actually been tinkering with my recipe lately and trying some new things. So, you just gotta have fun. Now, we need to pour our wax into the melting pot and heat it up. And this is not a great melting pot. This pot tends to burn the wax if you're not careful. I actually have a new professional double boiler melting pot I bought myself as a Christmas present that is on its way here, but instead of waiting around for it, we're just gonna make do with this old thing. And it's not that bad of a pot. I mean, I don't know. I've burned a lot of wax with this thing. It's pretty bad. After a little time has passed, the wax melts, and we're gonna check in on the temperature. All right, just a little over, not bad. And the mold's been sitting in the warming station for a bit, a little cooler than I like, but close enough. Let's do this. I'm going to start by pouring it into this paper cup first because it will make it a lot easier to pour. Now, I should probably be wearing my gloves because I have a tendency to make messes, but we'll see if I get lucky. Okay, all right. Here we go. Temperature's perfect. Pour that in there carefully. Not a lot of people do this. Not a lot of people pour their own wax prototypes. Most folks send off, like, you know, a resin copy or like the original sculpt to a factory, which I don't think is wise. I think you at the very least need to make a mold of your sculpt, because if something happens in transit or gets lost, then it's gone forever. You want to be able to make a copy. But I like making my own wax because I think it's rewarding. I think more people should do it. Now I'm tapping the mold to knock loose any air bubbles in there because, oh, it got me. Hot wax, no worries. I'll manage. Let's get it in that pressure pot because we need to pressure cast this wax. Putting it in the pressure pot will help to reduce air bubbles in the wax. And you might be thinking, why don't we just put this in a vacuum chamber to get the air bubbles out like we did with the silicone molds? Well, because that would make a hot mess. Vacuum chambers pull out air bubbles to the surface of the material so that they pop, causing a rise in material and then a collapse. We don't want that hot wax bubbling up out of our molds all over the place. Pressure pots, on the other hand, are great for casting things like wax and resin because the air pressure is forced into the tank and compressing the air bubbles down into tiny micro bubbles that are undetectable. So now we need to take the remaining wax that's still in the pot, pour it out to save for later. I'm going to do this off screen, but all you got to do is get a clean plastic tray or a large bin cover or something and pour the wax out on it. Wait for it to cool down and crack it apart into small pieces and just store the pieces in a big Ziploc bag to keep it from getting dirty. And you're good. Now we just got to wait for the prototypes to set up. Just to be safe, I always leave my prototypes in the pressure pot overnight. And you know what that means. We got some time on our hands, so I'm going to take this opportunity to give you a sneak peek into my new Vinyl Toy Factory edition that is currently under construction. So my dad and I have been building this for almost a year. We've got another several months of work ahead of us to finish it out, but the plan is to be totally self-sustainable here. I'm going to set up a big electroforming tank and make my own copper molds. I've got a custom electric melting furnace that's currently being fabricated so that we can get a salt bath going, which will allow me to pull my own soft vinyl toys. And most recently, we finished putting up the siding. I wanted to make it all rainbows, so my dad had this great idea. What if we painted the siding before we put it up? And doing that worked really well, I think. We didn't have to mask anything off or do any fancy brush work. We just pre-painted the pieces in rainbow fashion, starting at the bottom with purple and moving up color by color as we made it to the top. And here you can see me nailing up one of the final pieces. So this should give you a pretty good idea of the space we're working with. I've already got a pretty good sculpting and painting set up, so with all these new additions combined, we should be able to carry out every single part of the vinyl toy making process completely in-house. So I'm enthusiastically excited about this. All right, so it's now the following morning. The wax has had plenty of time to cool, so let's open up the pressure pot and see what we got. Now, one thing I can go ahead and warn you of before we open this up, wax shrinks as it cools. So the level of the wax will have sunk down in our molds a bit. You can compensate for this by making a taller molding sprue, but the downside to that is that your mold will subsequently be taller, and so you'll be using more silicone. And we all know silicone ain't cheap. So yeah, you see how it shrank down right to the recessed line that circled around the mold? That's where our copper wire is going to wrap around the prototype. So everything below that line needs to be pressure cast, but anything above it does not, because it won't be electroformed. That little part at the top will float over the bath. And this would make more sense if I explained how the metal molds were made, but we don't have time for that today, so you'll just have to take my word for it. So now let's open up this present and see what Santa Claus brought us. Let's find out if we were naughty or nice this year. And I don't know about y'all, but I'm feeling pretty nice. And part of being nice is being careful. So I'm going to be really cautious here. You can see I don't want to just forcefully yank it out and rip the silicone mold apart and crack any delicate pieces off. It's all about patience. you know? It's all about patience. Just a little pull here, go to the other side, you know, get some even pressure on that other side, pull it apart a little bit. You know, it's just kind of suctioned on there, you know. I didn't have to use any mold release in this because this particular recipe doesn't require that. But you could, if you know, if you're using a wax recipe that needs mold release, you know, you might want to do that. Here we go. Oh, I don't want to break those antlers. Look at that. That is what many people would call a very successful casting. All the pieces are intact. There aren't any air bubbles below the copper line. We got some air bubbles above the copper line, but that's not a big deal because again, that part of the prototype will not get electroformed. That part will be floating outside the bath. So this will work. And the seams are very subtle. Yeah, fairly easy to clean up. You can see some faint part lines right there, you know, here and there, but that won't be a problem to smooth out. You know, all in all, success. But again, back to that cautious mindset. A success can easily turn into a failure when you're careless. All I got to do is drop that prototype on the ground and boom, I've made a bunch of unnecessary work for myself. So my one big piece of advice when handling your wax prototype is to have a care. Be mindful. There's this line from the Tao Te Ching that I really like, that I play over and over in my head many times throughout many days. It says, success is as dangerous as failure. Hope is as hollow as fear. I remember when I first read those words. They really hit me. It's so true. And you might be thinking, what does that mean? What are you even trying to say with that? Well, the poem goes on to explain that whether you go up the ladder or down it, your position is shaky, right? Only when you stand with your 2 feet on the ground will you keep your balance, you know? It's true. Whenever we succeed at something, the stakes have just been raised. You know, we are at the top of our ladder, so to speak. And it's very easy to slip and fall from that ladder. But falling from our ladder isn't really that big of a deal. Metaphorically speaking, not physically, of course. You don't want to fall off a real ladder. If I had fallen off that ladder while nailing up the siding earlier, I would have probably broken my back and been in a world of hurt. But, you know, we're just talking philosophy here for a second. You know, the fact of the matter is, whether we've just experienced a huge success or a huge failure, both are equally insightful and also equally insignificant. If we put a lot of stock into success, then we'll be really bummed out whenever we fail. And on the other hand, if we allow ourselves to be affected too strongly by failure and take it too seriously, we'll find ourselves afraid to even try because of that fear of failure. And I think that's what that line in the poem is trying to shine a light on there, you know? Hope is as hollow as fear. So if we're always hoping for success, we'll find ourselves being afraid of the failure whenever we get that success, you know? So now we're basically just never really appreciating what is because of our obsession with success and failure. Know what I mean? Maybe I could be saying this better. Basically, it's better for our own mental well-being if we can remember whenever we perceive ourselves as succeeding at something to remind ourselves it's not a big deal. Don't take it seriously. Don't get too proud of that success, you know, in quotes, right? And if we can remember to practice that mindset whenever we inevitably perceive ourselves failing at something, we can remember that it too is not a big deal, not to take it seriously. Don't get too bummed out by that failure. Stay grounded, stay balanced, keep on keeping on. That's how we solve the big issues in our lives. Keeping ourselves grounded and humble like that will allow us to see things more clearly so that we can problem solve more easily without getting too worked up for too long. And I know that's easier said than done. I myself just recently experienced what I thought was a major failure with my work, and it troubled me deeply for a night. And my trick to get my head out of it was to basically tell myself, dude, you're too tired for this. You're just way too tired for this. Go to sleep. You can figure it out tomorrow. If that's ever happening to you, just tell yourself, seriously, just while you're laying in bed, tell yourself, dude, you're too tired for this. Just way too tired. And, that's what I tell myself, and it helps me. And so when I did it that night, I got some sleep. I woke up fresh. I cooked myself a big breakfast. I took the dogs for a walk, and all the while reminding myself that the whole thing was not that big of a deal. And once I accepted that, new ideas on how to overcome the situation started popping up in my mind. And that's because I was able to clear some space for those productive thoughts to enter. So I'm not saying don't get excited about something that's working out in your favor. And I'm not saying don't get bummed by something that's working against you. All I'm saying is that it's helpful to remember throughout all of it that life is fleeting. Things come and go. Things rise and fall. And so do we. It's natural. It's the way of the universe. And it's nothing to let yourself get too worked up about. So, what am I really doing here? Well, I am using a little brush to do some polishing. I'm using my trusty loop tool to carve away the part line in the same way I would have carved away the monster clay when making my original sculpt, right? I like to use similar tools to clean up my wax as I, the same way I sculpt my original, so that I can honor those original tool marks to keep everything unified. Does that make sense? Like, I know that if I wanted to, I could sand down this prototype and get everything really smooth and really clean looking. We could polish away all those rough tool marks, but doing that would totally erase the handmade quality I'm striving to showcase here. It can be hard to tell these days if something is created by computers or not. And I feel like now more than ever, it's important for people to see art that was clearly made with human hands. I think it can be inspiring for people to see what we as human beings are capable of with just a few simple tools and some wax, Just me and my hands working together to make something that will hopefully bring a smile to someone's face. And to remind people that there is value in taking your time with handmade art. That's actually something I really want to spotlight with my new toy factory that we're building. Everything is going to be hand done, from the sculpting to the prototyping, the molding, the vinyl casting, the painting, and airbrushing, all done old school. That's just how I roll. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I love the process. And I really enjoy this part of it, what I'm doing here, just finishing this prototype by hand with these particular techniques is quite rewarding for me. So, yeah, I think I'm actually going to stop talking for a moment so that we can just focus on completing the work. I've been talking a lot, I feel. So we'll try a little moment of silence. How about it? All right. I'm happy with that. This will work. And the next step is to drill a hole into the molding sprue so that when we're ready to electroform it, we can stick a little rod in there to suspend it in the electroforming tank so that it can float in the electrolytic solution. Let's see how deep that goes. Oh yeah, that's plenty deep. Plenty deep. That's good. Let's clean that up. So real quick, I want to show you another casting I did where the jackalope's antler broke off at the tip. See? In case something like this happens to one of your prototypes, I want to show you how to fix it. A hot wax pen is handy for fixing these kinds of issues. Mine is pretty fancy. It's a Kerr Ultra Waxer used commonly by dentists. You might not need something quite this fancy, but I really like this pen. You can set the perfect temperature and you can use 2 pens at once on this, which is pretty cool, but we're just going to use one for now. And what we're doing here is essentially welding wax. We just want to set that broken piece back where it belongs and then use an appropriately sized pen tip. This one's kind of small, but not the smallest one I have. And we're just carefully milting both sides right along the crack, welding them back together again. I like to occasionally stop and let the wax cool for a moment so that I can see how the wax is forming. See? And you want to make sure you weld every single angle of that piece that's cracked off. No weak points. Weld all around it. Get into the spots that are hard to reach if you have to, and then once you've got it welded back on, it's time to smooth things out and reform it to look like the original. So in this case, I'm just running the wax pen up and down along the antler, and you can see how it's reshaping it to look a little more natural. And if there's like a bit of a bulge where you're reforming it, you just got to smooth things out a little further. Don't be afraid to draw the wax further down the hole of the antler. You see what I mean? And just kind of getting that bulge out. This is just one way I like to use this pen. You can do so much more with it. It's a fun tool to play with. All these tools that I've used today, you don't need any of them. There are other ways of doing all of this. Other tools you could use. You could use an alcohol torch to heat up some metal dental tools to do what I'm doing here. It's all up to you to find what works best for your tastes. I'm only showing you these prototyping methods of mine in order to give you another perspective. Perhaps it will help you strengthen your own craft. So that's that. If you've watched my other videos, you now know how to sculpt your own toy, mold it, and make your own wax prototype that's ready to send off to the factory. And if you don't have a factory to send it to, do like me and make your own factory. All right, well, how about we send things off with a nice poem? What do you say?
Take it away one more time, baby James.
Mushroom mind, I am the one speaking through stillness, silently creeping under your noses, through the soil that you ignore. Give me the looming rain, the dregs of darkness, the company of goblins, the fallen leaves, the webs of death, the little wonders unseen. What creatures out there can resist my taste? They travel from afar in their cumbersome bodies, lured by my scent with fear in their minds. I fear nothing, not of life, not of death, for I grow unceasingly, spreading, spreading. Through your ground the worms crawl by me, through your wood the ants march past me, through your water poison lips drink of me, through your air on the wings of fairies. Upon me the spiders feast, picking their teeth. Upon me the goblins dream, wandering beneath. Out of sight from careless eyes, my silence is power.
Happy holidays! Bye! Well, y'all ready for the big sleep?
You betcha.
Shut me down and wake me up in the year 2029, please.